Steve took my stand away. I thought you liked me, Steve. Thank you. Oh, we have such wonderful people in this church. And thank you all for being here today. Good morning and welcome. Welcome. Peggy, that song, both songs, Try, I put my lipstick on, my makeup on, and I worried about how I will show up. But you know what? How I show up is who I am. And I appreciate you for accepting me for who I am. And then Amazing Grace. Many people who know me know that that song has a deep meaning for me. And just last Wednesday, and this is not what I was going to talk about, but I have to share this with you because it was a real epiphany. Tomorrow begins Black History Month. And last Wednesday, during the Wednesday evening service, George Smiley, who's one of our congregants, after Warren Teachout, gave a wonderful lesson on Amazing Grace. And he talked about the power of grace. And he talked about John Newton, who you may know was a slave trader and turned his life around and became an abolitionist. Warren's message was powerful. And then David Adams sang Amazing Grace with all the feeling and the soul that that song was originated with. And then George Smiley said to me, "Have you heard about the Black Keys?" And I said, "No, I thought he meant Florida Keys, had some black keys, maybe a segregated beach or something, I don't know." He said, "No, I've got to send this to you." And so he sent me this email of this video of a gentleman by the name of Whitley Phipps. And Whitley Phipps is a musical scholar, and I'm not sure what else, but he's telling the story of Amazing Grace. And he opened my eyes to something that I didn't know. During slavery, slaves were only allowed to play on the black keys. They're called sharps and flats. And so Amazing Grace was played on sharps and flats, as most Negro spirituals. Now, the significance of that story is more than about the black keys. I thought I knew a little bit about history and about John Newton, having been a captain of a slave ship and decided that he didn't want to do that anymore. But what I didn't know was the slaves on the ship from West Africa would be moaning some kind of a chant. And eventually John Newton went on to write the words to that chant. Now, I grew up in a Baptist church, and moaning is a part of the service. If you've ever been to a Baptist church, moaning is important. The elders of the church, mostly men, moaned a lot. And I never understood the significance of that until I became an adult and understood that sometimes our lives, we're feeling in so much pain that all we can do is moan. I remember a song I heard growing up, "Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Oh, Martha, don't you moan." Moaning is a part of our consciousness. As we talked in the Bible class this morning, sound may be where creation started. Just the sound. Just the sound. So I'm going to get into my talk this morning. Who am I and why am I here? You may be asking yourself the same question. I've asked myself that many times in my life. Who am I and what am I doing here? Well, there were three people debating this subject: a doctor, a civil engineer, and a computer scientist. They were talking about what is the oldest profession. And so the doctor, all smug, said, "Let me tell you. In the Bible it says that God created Eve from a rib he had taken from Adam. Now, this clearly required surgery. So I can rightly say that my profession is the oldest profession." The civil engineer interrupted and said, "Well, wait a minute. Even earlier in the book of Genesis, it states that God created the order of the heavens and the earth from out of chaos. This was first and certainly most spectacular, the application of civil engineering. Therefore, you're wrong, my friend. Mine is the oldest profession." The computer scientist leaned back in his chair, smiled and said confidently, "Ah, but who do you think created chaos?" Duke and I have been covering a 6-week series, started 2 weeks ago, on a guide to consciousness, a guide to conscious evolution, from the book Birthing a Greater Reality by Reverend Robert Brummett. And if you were not able to get in on his class, which started this past Thursday here at the temple at 7 o'clock, you still have time to join the class. He's a phenomenal futurist and a wonderful unity minister and teacher. So when I heard Duke talk the first Sunday, he was talking about evolution, and my skin began to crawl, and I thought, well, there's got to be more to it than just some kind of big bang that happened. Which came first, the chicken or the egg, and then the chicken or the egg, and then the chicken or the egg? How many times can we argue that? If the chicken came first, then where the egg come from? Egg came first, then where the chicken come from? Okay, well then Duke clarified that last Sunday. Well, he talked about spiral dynamics and our evolution in consciousness. And he clarified that when he answered a question from one of our congregants that was put in the offering basket. And if you have a question that you'd like answered, put it in the offering basket when it comes around. And the question was, okay, evolution, yeah, I get that, but what about God? And Duke's answer was, God is it all. God is it all. In the Mysteries of Genesis, Unity's co-founder, Charles Fillmore, interprets the creation story. He said, creation of consciousness and the beginning of evolution started with the creation of the spiritual man, which preceded the formation of the physical man, or the Adam. The spiritual man is the Word, and the physical man, the Adam in the creation story, is the Word in expression. In Genesis, the first chapter, the 26th through the 27th verse, we read, man was created in the image and likeness of God. Now, image, when you look at that word and separate it, it's I'm age. I'm age. Your image. It's the divine potential in every one of us. That's who we are. That's our image. And the likeness is the unique human expression of every person evolving into full expression of your I-mage. I am age, your image. He talked about being thrown out of the Garden of Eden as well, and that reminds me of this little story about a Sunday school teacher, which I used to be, and loved to hear the little kids interpret things in their own innocent way. So they were talking about the creation story, and the teacher asked them to draw a picture of the creation, what they thought it looked like. So Johnny drew this picture. Everybody else's picture was God, and then there was a person, and there was a woman, and there was a man, and there were birds, and there were fishes, and so forth. But Johnny's picture was a car. And in the front seat of the car was a man. And the back seat of the car was a man and a woman. And so the teacher said, Johnny, can you tell me about your picture of creation? He said, well, that's God driving Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. Now, Fillmore tells us that the Garden of Eden stands for being birthed from the womb of our creation into our evolution toward full consciousness of who we are, our individuality. So our primary evolution, our chicken or egg, takes place within us. But to evolve as humanity as a whole, Fillmore tells us we have to involve our conscious awareness of our divine nature, who we are and what we're here to be. Reverend Robert Brummett says to understand how we evolve in consciousness, we need to look back at where we've been. Take an inventory of where we are right now. So I looked back a few decades, and I saw that we had the industrial age. I didn't want to go back too far, it would take all day. Then we had the first flight, and then women gained the right to vote. The United Nations created a Declaration of Human Rights for all people. Separate but equal was ended in this country. Man lands on the moon. The internet brings the world into our living rooms. The first woman is appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. The first African-American president is elected, and it was heard around the world. All people are free to marry who they love in this country. And this day, January 31st, 1865, Congress passed the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery in the United States. So what brought about all this change over these few decades? In a twinkling of an eye, we've had immense change. We've had unbelievable things happen, and they're still happening even faster. Maybe because I'm getting older, but it seems like things are happening faster and faster. We call that, according to scientists, critical mass. When a certain phenomenon reaches a tipping point where so many collective minds have joined together, we create a big bang of our own. We create change. We realize then that it's not an us and them phenomena. We are all in this together. So when it comes to the theory of evolution, Brummett talks about a case of mistaken identity. Now, we throw that word identity around a lot these days. If you've ever had identity theft, you know what that experience is like. Years ago, when I was pregnant with my second child, I was visiting relatives, and I didn't really know the neighborhood, and I was way pregnant, about 8 months. Had a little Volkswagen, had my daughter in the car and my 2 young nieces in the back seat. And just as I pushed the seat forward to let my nieces out, I felt a tug on my arm. It almost broke my arm. And I looked around, and this man had taken off with my purse. Now, identity theft today is even worse, but back then, this was quite an experience. I had to contact or remember what was in my purse, which was difficult. I always kept a lot of stuff in my purse. And then I had to contact everybody. And then the FBI contacted me on my job because whoever stole my purse used my name to get a flight, and they crossed state lines, and they did all sorts of things. I had a credit card. The only credit card I had was Sears. And it was like an act of God to get them to restore my credit, even with the FBI statement that my identity had been stolen. That's just one example of identity, but the other example is who you are and why you're here. You know, we identify ourselves by our driver's license, our social security number, what we're called, how we're called, mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, uncle, aunt, brother, sister, whatever you're called. And some names you don't want to mention. And sometimes we fall into identifying ourselves by what other people call us. But what Brummett's talking about is a greater sense of awareness, deeper than that surface identity of who you are. In the theory of involution, Brummett says spirit is losing itself in human form or falling asleep, and that's the Adam state, when we're really not quite conscious of who we are and what we're here to be. And where we are today is we're just about to wake up from that dream. And you can tell by all the things that are happening all over the world at the same time. Instantly, we can be in touch with anywhere in the world. And what we do here affects other people in the world who don't know us, have no idea, maybe they don't even speak our language. But we're realizing, we're waking up to the fact that one little thing we do can have a massive impact on everybody else. Nearly 48 years ago, a significant thing in history happened that you may remember. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins stepped out of the Apollo 11 and walked on the moon. And of that event, Neil Armstrong said, one small step for mankind, and one giant leap, one small step for man, and one giant leap for mankind. One small step for man, and one giant leap for mankind. Now, Star Trek calls this the new frontier. In fact, they called it the final frontier. But I beg to differ. We are in the midst of the new frontier, and it is a frontier of conscious awareness of who we are, not as individuals, but collectively, and why we are here to be, what we came into this world to be. When we merge science with spirituality, we see that both are searching for truth, one for the physical world and the other for the nature of consciousness. Now, Western science has typically looked at things from this perspective: the edges of the universe, where no man has gone before, back in time to the beginning, and down into the subatomic structure of matter, concluding in the past that there is no place or need for God. Science didn't consider back in those days the inner realm of the mind or the consciousness. Spirituality was seen as unscientific in terms of self-liberation. And we often believed what we were told. The Apostle Paul reminded us in Romans, the 12th chapter, the 2nd verse, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Your mind. We're giving you tools here, tools that we try to put to use. We are not gurus. Just because we stand here on this platform on Sunday doesn't make us the gurus of the world. We're growing and learning at the same time and try to share the truths that we are coming to understand. But one truth is, we are greater than we know. We also heard that same warning from Buddha that Paul gave us. He said some 2,500 years ago, "Do not believe anything because I have told you it is so. Only believe it when you have tested it for yourself." And how do you do that? Just live your life. So Brahmet says, the identity of the self or ego is that sleep state that many of us find ourselves in from time to time. The Bible offers many examples. Do you know the Bible was the first book ever printed, well, collection of books ever printed with movable type? In Genesis, the first book in the Bible, the first words are, "In the beginning." In the beginning, God. Now, the stories in the Bible, there are stories, and they're based on allegories, where characters and events are symbols that stand for our human evolution. If you read it from that context, it's a story about you. It's our story. Genesis also explains that when God said, then we hear God had a word, or God said something, meaning there was a word connected. Maybe it was a sound, who knows, who was there, were any of you there to hear it? But I just think it gives us the idea that we had the ability to speak things into existence for ourselves, because the Bible is a story about us. In unity, we learned that words have power. In Greek, the word for word is logos, which means identification of mind in its intelligent, lawful, and all-powerful capacity. Charles Fillmore explains word this way in The Revealing Word. What we are is a result of the evolution of our consciousness. And this consciousness is a result of seed ideas sown in the mind. In the beginning, God implanted his perfect word, involved this seed word into each individual. It's very important to understand the importance of our consciousness in spiritual growth. Divine ideas might be incorporated into our consciousness before they can mean anything to us. Evolution, then, is the unfolding of consciousness. It's the unfolding consciousness of that which God involved. Remember that word, involved, man in the beginning. Now, another word that I found significant in Charles Fillmore's definition is implanted. We are searching for what we already are to be someplace we've already been. It's already implanted, but we're only beginning to awaken to this truth. Let me give you an example. The parable of the rope. How many of you have ever heard the parable of the rope? I love stories. We are like a person holding on to a rope. Have you ever held onto a rope like in gym class? I never could climb the rope. I just was not that athletic, but I admired everybody who could climb that rope. That was fascinating to me. You're holding on for dear life, knowing that if you let go, you'll surely fall to your death. Your parents, your teachers, and everybody else have told you that if you let go, something bad's going to happen. Now let's say this particular individual looks around and sees everybody else doing the same thing, holding on to their rope as tight as they can, fearful of letting go. Nothing would entice him to let go until this wise woman comes along. She knows that holding on is unnecessary. As a matter of fact, it holds you back from your good. So she looks for a way to dispel his fear of letting go. She talks of real security and real happiness and true joy and peace. And she tells him that he can taste this if he would just release one finger. One finger, the man thinks? That's not too much of a risk for just a little taste of happiness and peace and joy. So he agrees to take the first step. But that's not enough to last. He just gets a glimpse of it. She says, even greater joy, happiness, and peace can be yours if you would just release a second finger. He hesitates. He asks himself, can I really do this? Do I have the courage? Will I be safe? Then flexing his finger, he feels how it would be to let go just a little more, and he takes the risk. He's relieved to find that he doesn't fall. He discovers even greater happiness and peace and joy. But he asks, could more be possible? Trust me, she says. Have I failed you so far? I know your fears. I know what your mind is telling you. This is crazy. That this goes against everything you've ever learned. But look at me, I'm free. I promise you will be safe, and you will know even greater happiness and contentment than you've ever known. He thinks to himself, do I really want that much happiness and peace? I mean, it's kind of comfortable holding onto this rope. I'm used to this. I've been holding on this rope forever, and I'm safe. In principle, he says to himself, well, I don't know if I can be sure if I'll be safe, but I like the way that happiness and peace thing felt. So with a little coaxing, he begins to look at his fears and to consider their basis and to explore what it is he really wants. And he knows he can do it. It's only a matter of time until he releases his grip. And as he does, an even greater sense of peace and joy and happiness overwhelm him. But he's now hanging by one finger. Now reason tells him that he could have fallen 2 fingers ago, but he didn't. And he wonders if there's something wrong with holding on itself. He wonders if those who've taught him, those he's listened to, have taught him wrong. She says, this one is up to you. I can't help you any further. Just remember that all your fears are ungrounded. Trusting this quiet voice, he gradually releases the last finger. He stays exactly where he is. Then looking down, he suddenly realizes why. He was standing on the ground the whole time. And he realized he need never hold on to his old beliefs again. And he finds true peace and happiness. Now, consciousness is when we let go of the ego, the old, outdated ideas about who we are and why we're here. The self-centered ideas and practices that are holding us back, and we awaken to our true Christ nature. Robert Brummett, Barbara Marx Hubbard, Russell Peters, Duke Tufte, Dr. Catherine Thomas, and Donna Johnson, and other futurists remind us that we are at a tipping point in the world today, and the world's survival depends on us to awaken to who we are. Everything we do and say has an impact on someone we don't even know. As Unity's principle says, we are co-creators with God And we create our reality through our way of thinking. Let me say that again. We are co-creators with God. I didn't learn this in the Baptist church. We are co-creators with God. And we create our reality through our way of thinking. And what are we here to do? We are here to create a better world. As Dr. Sharif Abdullah says, a world that works for all. Not just me, not just you, but a world that works for everybody. It's like the statement that Neil Armstrong made when he stepped out of the Apollo 11 and said, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." But that is only the first step in our evolution. We recognize that we use our creative power through the Word of God. And what is the Word of God? I am. I am. I am the light of the world. I am. By using this power, we become the life and light of the world. And to reach this new state of reality, we need to let go of our old way of thinking and being and explore, just like the space exploration, explore that new frontier, inner space. You have a blueprint of what is yours to do. It's already been given to you. By raising your consciousness, you become God's hands and feet. Every experience we have brings us closer to this new frontier. As Eckhart Tolle says, life will give you whatever experience is most helpful for the evolution of your consciousness. Life will give you whatever experience is most helpful for the evolution of your consciousness. Major decisions that affect the world have been made by self-centered minds. Famine and drought. The problems with the water in Flint, Michigan. The haves and the have-nots. The whole history of human development can be viewed as a progressive decline in egocentrism. That is the new frontier. When we stop thinking only of ourselves and realize that it is our individual responsibility to create a world that works for all. Letting go of our fears that we won't have enough if we share what we have with someone else. That we won't have the status if we allow ourselves to be on the level with everybody. Letting go of thoughts of lack and limitation in our own lives. Just as the moon didn't suddenly show up when our astronauts landed in Apollo 11, everything we need is already here. It didn't just show up. It's already here. What we've been looking for has been with us all along, waiting for us to set out on that new frontier of a higher state of consciousness. So ask yourselves as we go into meditation, who am I? Why am I here? What is mine to do? And remember, you were created to be an indispensable part of God's divine plan for this world. Let us take that into meditation.